On the bright morning of Crestwood High's graduation ceremony, the stadium buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the triumphant rustling of graduation gowns. Yet among the thousands of cheering families and proud parents stood one man whose presence felt unusually small despite the vastness of the space. His name was Marcus Hale, a 45-year-old single father and janitor who had worked 3 jobs for years just to keep the lights on. His clothes, though clean, looked faded from too many washes, and the deep lines on his face were shaped by exhaustion far more than age. Marcus didn't come dressed like the other parents in crisp shirts and polished shoes. Instead, he still wore his pale, gray work uniform because he had come directly from the university building he cleaned every morning. He couldn't afford to miss a shift, not even today, but he also couldn't afford to miss his son's graduation. And then, just as he reached the crowded bleachers, the world around him shifted. The bright sun hit the ink on his forearm, the faded, unmistakable tattoo of an elite Navy unit. And in an instant, someone watching from across the field froze. Before we go deeper, if you believe in stories of kindness, sacrifice, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Good Deed Stories. It truly helps bring more inspiring stories to the world. Marcus didn't know that anyone had noticed him. He simply clutched the small, crumpled program in his hands, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and disbelief. His son, Rowan Hale, was graduating high school, something Marcus had feared might never happen. Rowan had struggled for years, battling insecurities born from growing up without a mother and watching his father break himself to provide. But despite the hardships, Rowan had pushed through, excelled even, earning top honors and acceptance into a state university. To Marcus, this moment felt like redemption, the proof that his sacrifices meant something. Yet Marcus stood at the far edge of the bleachers, away from the families taking photos and celebrating loudly. He preferred to blend into the background, both because he felt out of place and because he didn't want to draw attention to his uniform. People often assume things about janitors: lazy, unskilled, unambitious, never imagining that some of them had once lived entirely different lives, fought different battles, carried memories they wished they could forget. What Marcus didn't know was that, on the opposite side of the field, in the VIP seating area designated for guest speakers, sat Admiral Preston Mackay, a decorated Navy officer known for his sharp mind, intimidating presence, and observant eyes. He was scheduled to give the keynote speech, but for a moment, all of his rehearsed words were forgotten. His gaze remained locked on the tattoo Marcus thought no one cared to recognize anymore, a symbol only worn by members of a classified Navy rescue division disbanded years after a devastating mission cost many lives. The Admiral had seen that tattoo only a handful of times in his life, each one connected to a soldier who had saved lives at great personal cost. His heart tightened. Could it truly be him? Could this quiet, exhausted janitor be the Marcus Hale he had once read about in commendation files, the man who disappeared from the military radar after a catastrophic rescue mission overseas? Marcus remained unaware of the frozen gaze observing him. His eyes stayed focused on the stage, scanning faces until he found Rowan. Tall, slender, nervous yet smiling proudly as he lined up with his class. The sight filled Marcus with a warmth he rarely felt. For once, he wasn't thinking about unpaid bills, broken machinery at the apartment, or the extra shift he'd worked tonight. Today was sacred. But even as joy filled him, he couldn't hide the ache in his body. The years had not been kind. Old injuries nagged at him, especially the one in his shoulder. The injury he sustained during a classified rescue mission that no one outside the Navy ever heard about. That mission had changed his life forever, ending his military career and leaving him with guilt he carried silently like a second skin. He shifted his weight slowly, trying not to wince as he leaned against the metal railing. All he wanted was to see Rowan walk across that stage before heading back to work. He didn't need recognition. He didn't want sympathy. He only needed this moment with his son. Across the stadium, Admiral Mackay stood abruptly, startling an assistant seated next to him. Without a word, he moved down the steps, weaving through rows of chairs, as if drawn by instinct. He couldn't look away from the tattoo, its faded colors matching exactly what he remembered from the classified personnel files. The Admiral had spent decades commanding extraordinary men, but few had left an impression like Marcus Hale. If it was truly him, he deserved far more than standing alone at the edge of a bleacher in an old janitor uniform. But Marcus didn't notice any of this. He was lost in the memory of Rowan's difficult childhood, his wife abandoning them shortly after Rowan's 3rd birthday, the financial collapse that followed, the injury that left him unable to continue military service, and the humiliation of starting life over with no savings, no degree, and no support. Becoming a janitor wasn't a choice, it was survival. And yet, he never once let Rowan see him break. Every night he told his son the same words, "You will go farther than I ever could." And now, he was watching those words come true. The ceremony began, and the principal's voice echoed across the stadium. Names were called, students walked, families cheered. Marcus clapped quietly each time Rowan's row edged closer to the stage. He imagined his son's future. College, a good career, a better life. Everything Marcus had fought for. Then, as Rowan reached the base of the steps, Marcus's entire world shifted. Admiral Mackay stepped into the aisle, pausing only for a moment before approaching him directly. The crowd noise didn't fade, but for Marcus, time seemed to slow. It wasn't until the Admiral stood only a few feet away that Marcus reacted, confusion sweeping across his features. Why was a Navy Admiral headed toward him? The Admiral's eyes softened as he studied Marcus. The uniform, the tired stance, the unmistakable tattoo. In that moment, Admiral Mackay felt something he rarely did, deep respect mixed with sorrow. How could a man who had once saved lives now live so quietly, unnoticed, almost forgotten? But Marcus didn't want attention. He took a small step back, instinctively pulling his sleeve down to hide the tattoo. He didn't want questions, didn't want memories resurfacing. All he wanted was to watch his son graduate. Yet fate had different plans. As Rowan's name boomed through the stadium speakers, Marcus looked toward the stage again, pride swelling in his chest. Rowan walked across the platform with confidence, shook hands with the principal, received his diploma, and lifted it high as the crowd erupted in cheers. Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes, tears he quickly wiped away with the back of his sleeve. But Admiral Mackay didn't clap like the others. Instead, he did something that made nearby families fall silent. He moved aside, turned toward Marcus, and held himself with the full dignity of his rank. Then he extended his hand, not in greeting, but in acknowledgement. An unspoken salute from one soldier to another. Marcus froze. His heart hammered painfully. He shook his head slightly, trying to dismiss the gesture, but the Admiral didn't waver. The surrounding families quieted, sensing something they didn't understand but felt deeply. Marcus reluctantly stepped forward, his voice strained with humility and discomfort, as he tried to avoid the attention. But the Admiral raised his voice, calm yet powerful, addressing not just Marcus but the stunned onlookers. He spoke of sacrifices unseen, heroes unrecognized, courage that didn't fade with time. He told the crowd, without revealing classified details, that Marcus Hale had once saved the lives of soldiers in impossible conditions, risking everything for others and paying the price with injuries that ended his military career. Parents and students alike stared in disbelief. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others whispered softly. Rowan froze on the steps, his eyes widening as he recognized the man being honored, his father. And then, the Admiral did what no one expected. He took Marcus's hand, shook it firmly, and said loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear that Marcus Hale's courage was something to be celebrated today, just as much as the accomplishments of every graduating student. The applause began slowly, a few claps scattered through the crowd, then more, until the entire stadium thundered with appreciation. Marcus felt overwhelmed, embarrassed even, but also touched in a way he couldn't describe. He wasn't used to being seen. He wasn't used to being valued. His son reached him moments later, throwing his arms around him in a tight embrace. Marcus finally allowed himself to cry openly, not from pain, but from relief, pride, and gratitude. Rowan whispered that he had always known his father was extraordinary, but now the world knew too. As the applause continued, the Admiral stepped back respectfully, letting father and son share their moment. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the weight on his shoulders lift, replaced by a quiet sense of dignity he thought he had lost forever. If this moment touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Good Deed Stories. Your support helps keep inspiring stories alive. And before we end, please leave a comment telling us what part of the story moved you the most. Your words matter.